Without Jennings giving a 10, life just ain't worth living.
Oh my god, Denise Dano? Oh my god, that would be horrible. It's time for a review of the new Earl album. I don't like shit, I don't go outside. Earl Sweatshirt is a California rapper, best known as the once missing lyricist extraordinaire of West Coast hip-hop collective Odd Future Wolfgang Kill Them All, who exploded onto the internet with an immeasurable wave of hype. And now that most of the dust has settled, I don't feel like the experience was completely pointless, but it hasn't exactly panned out into many great albums. But there have been flashes in the Odd Future pan. Frank Ocean's Channel Orange, Bastard, Wolf was pretty decent, Earl's beloved debut Earl Sweatshirt mixtape, and Doris was pretty decent. Even though this album was kind of underwhelming to me, I was able to appreciate the fact that Earl seemed really no bullshit about his music. And even though I liked the very dark and moody direction that his music went in, the very cold and subdued vocal delivery Earl had going and the murky instrumentals got just a little redundant after a while. And I guess I was hoping for on his next project that he would come through with a bit more energy and aggression. It would really pick things up and bring some more diversity and maybe some more excitement to an Earl Sweatshirt project. Maybe even help him push past the very obvious doom influence that's been running through all of his projects thus far. But rather than turning up on this new album over here, Earl has essentially hunchback limped further into the darkness with a very rusty oil lantern. Even though it was a standoffish album, Doris at least felt like it was trying to be commercially successful, at least a little. I Don't Like Shit is way more uncompromising. It is not looking to please anybody. It's despondent, it's depressing, and as if this is a surprise given the title, it's antisocial. The slightly claustrophobic and lo-fi production and the kind of loud mixing of the vocals definitely give the feeling that Earl is like holed up somewhere in like a very small, smoky, very dimly lit room recording and writing this music. The production on this album is filled with these kind of warped, slow motion jazz chord loops. And even though the beats on this record are very dusty, they're simple, they're skeletal, they're moving at the pace of molasses, I actually like a lot of them. They do have a very strong emotional tone to them, some very sad melodies and just interesting sounds. The beat for the track AM featuring Wiki of Rat King actually has these kind of silly children stock sound samples thrown throughout them. One of my favorite beats on this entire project is actually for the song Grief, which kind of has this very droney instrumental. I could only liken it to something sort of atmospheric and very thick and dense like cloud rap. But the drone is just so lo-fi, it's so kind of just grimy. It feels like it could have come off like a grouper album or something like that. And Grief is actually something this record is very heavy with, to the point where I think it actually affects the album's inner workings. There isn't much on this album in the way of hooks, and the hooks that are here are very subdued and not really sung or anything like that. They're usually just, rapped. The tracks on this album are very brief, and the album overall is just barely 30 minutes. The track listing of I Don't Like Shit doesn't really have that strong of a flow to it. It just kind of feels like this one desolate, sad, flat experience. And Earl's very sad funk on this album doesn't just affect how the record and the music moves on this project. Of course, it also affects the lyrics. There are a lot of themes on this album in Earl's verses about not being able to trust or maybe even love people, whether that be his friends or women or his family. This feeling that he doesn't have a home, not in sort of, he's homeless, but like he doesn't have a place he can call home in kind of the figurative, emotional sense. There are people going into this album who are probably hoping for something more explosive, like I was. However, I don't feel completely disappointed by that, but I think there will be people going into this album who find this record to be just as boring as Doris, and maybe to an extent feel like Earl just isn't even trying. But to my ears, it feels like Earl still has flow on this album, and he's putting effort into his rhymes. Even if a lot of the verses on this album read like a kind of unfocused and disheveled update on Earl's life over the past few years. The lyrical content of this album is about as eventful as you would expect from a project named I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside. We have appearances and mentions of familiar faces like Christian Clancy, Odd Future Manager, or Vince Staples on the very last track of this LP. Earl raps about his interactions with fans and how he feels like he owes pictures to them because they've got him to where he is, and he also, pays his mother's rent, tries to help her out. He also details the drama surrounding a pretty nasty romantic breakup at one point. If you're not interested in the finer details in the day-to-day of Earl's life, depression, and music career, this album just might not translate to you. You might find it kind of tedious. At least that's how it feels to me sometimes, especially on a track like Inside, where what Earl brings lyrically and topically, while his rhyme schemes and his flow are definitely together on this track, and I don't mind the beat, what he's saying just isn't compelling to me. But even though this album can feel like getting dragged through an emotional sewer pipe, there are highlights, like the very dreamy and kind of jazzy instrumentation on the song Huey, or Earl's very aggressive vocal delivery on the song Mantra, or the very melancholy melody on the song Faucet, and the kind of emotionally powerful lyrics on this track, which are very withdrawn. It's a very misanthropic track, and so is the song Grief. It's just kind of this 1-2 punch combo of intense sadness. On this track too, Earl kind of raps about being at the precinct, getting booked. There's also a bar on the song Off Top that I love where Earl is rapping about being trouble since he tumbled out the stroller. Another line where he says he's been this way since the Motorola Razor. And the song Grown Ups, which features an incredibly dark instrumental and a feature from Dash of ASAP Mob, and who's also Dame Dash's nephew. His feature isn't so much a standalone verse as much as a lot of the time he's kind of rapping in tandem with Earl, and they sort of switch back and forth line from line, or sometimes they're just saying lines at the same time. It has this kind of weird doubled overdubbed quality to it that actually I haven't really heard in that many hip-hop songs, at least not from the beginning to the end of the song, and it has an interesting sound to it. However, the other features on this album just aren't nearly as, experimental or even enjoyable. Wiki of Rat King, it doesn't seem like he really did much on his feature except to spit a few bars, and his verse just kind of fizzled out toward the end, and he was just really filling up space. And then Earl came in and just came really hard with a kind of relentless flow, one of the more relentless flows on the entire album. I don't know. It was just kind of a weird moment. I mean, I'm sure there was kind of an artistic choice for just how lethargic and uneventful Wiki's verse was. Just like kind of a lot of this album is very lethargic and not really trying too hard. And the verse Nakel dropped on the song DNA, while it did have energy to it, he just sounded really young and amateurish to my ears. This album, though, still is a pretty interesting hip-hop record. If you are a hip-hop fan in any way, shape, or form, I think this album is worth trying out. Because even though there were only a couple tracks that I came away from saying, wow, this is a good song, or wow, that was a great verse, the entire record as a whole kind of works together pretty well in that it all reinforces these really dark, incredibly depressing feelings. Even the title and the cover art here, there's something just kind of nihilistic about it. This album embodies that whole just fuck it, fuck everything attitude to the highest degree. So in that sense, this is a unique album, but I don't think it necessarily saves it from a lot of the weaker tracks on here. And that when I was done listening to it, I just kind of felt, really empty and hollow inside. Not like I really got that much from the album. I'm feeling a strong 6 to a light 7 on this LP. Transition. If you've given this Earl Sweatshirt project a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it, hate it, why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Like a new fan, Colonel? Earl Sweatshirt. I don't like shit. Forever.